Okay, I think we're all here. Thanks, everybody, and welcome again to this 15th seminar of the International Tree Mortality Network. Um, Today, I'm really happy to have Miroslav Svoboda with us, who will be presenting on past disturbance history, tree longevity, and recent tree mortality in temperate primary mountain forests. And Miro is, I would say, the resident expert on forests in Central and Eastern Europe and natural forest dynamics in these forests. And we'll take a very specific and also different from the last seminar's perspective on mortality in linking it to disturbance history and tree longevity. Miro has been working in these issues for at least 20 years and has put together a tremendous amount of data and with a huge effort in dendroecology, but also related methods on these forests. And this is all brought together in this remote forest network. You see the URL also on Miro's first slide here. And I'm really, really excited to learn more about this. And Miro, with this, I would hand over to you and very, very much look forward to your input. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, Rupert. Thank you very much for invitation. It's a great honor for me to present here today for everyone all over the globe. So I hope that you guys will enjoy the talk. I'm a little bit nervous, especially because I don't see really your faces, but let's go. So as Rupert said, we are like a small group of forest ecologists from Czech University of Life Sciences, based in Prague. And before I will go to the talk, I would like just shortly a little bit advertise what we all do, because it's not only what Rupert just said and what I will present today, but also we work with different aspects of forest management, biodiversity. What we are trying to promote is something which is called ecological forestry or ecological forest management. I will not go into the detail, but someone would be interested. And also what we started to do in the last few years is this wood anatomy and dendrometers, which we are using to actually understand the effect of the climate change on the tree, but also stand and landscape level growth in our country. We have about 1,000 dendrometers installed in the field, and we are all excited about this new project. Of course, it's very time consuming, really difficult, but I think it's a nice way to understand what's going on in terms of climate change and tree growth. But again, I'm not going to talk about it, but if someone would be interested in the future, we would be very much interested in cooperation in this field. So what I will talk today, it's about disturbance history, tree mortality and tree longevity patterns in primary forest. And I guess I don't have to go to the detail, but increase canopy mortality that we observe over the last 2-3 decades is a really concern to many people. And of course, climate change, this is something that I don't have to really discuss, and we all are aware of that. But what I would like to discuss that despite ongoing climate change in many regions, the human management and human response to the disturbances is still the major driver of the changes in the forest in many of our landscape, and I will touch that later on. And also, what I would like to discuss and to highlight is this nice figure and actually the interpretation of this nice figure, especially when we work in the forest. And if we work with the long-term dynamics, we have to be very careful with interpretation of our relatively short observation period that we are having, for which we have our data, and especially how to interpret it in the long term. I really like this figure on this one paper, and I think that it's important to be aware of the consequences of what we actually studying and how does it fit to the long-term dynamics of given system. Also, I would like to a little bit more go into the into the primary forest issue. So again, I guess I don't have to discuss why primary forests are important and what actually mean primary forest. But what's probably more important is that Europe is not really known for a large extent of the primary forest, but there are still primary forests existing. And surprisingly, in many regions, despite the 200-300 years of intensive forest management, we have still very limited knowledge in Europe about the extent and overall area of the primary forest. And this one of the recent papers from Francesco Maria Sabatini tried to summarize actually what are the hotspots of the primary forest, and of course boreal zone, Sweden, Finland, but also the temperate zone of Central and Southeast Europe, the Carpathian Mountains and the Balkan Mountains. They are the hotspots. And when we look at the specific countries with large extents of the reported primary forest, you can see that there are countries which quite large extents of primary forest. But what I also have to say that there are countries for which we don't have almost any data, and also there are countries for which the data are somehow blurred, like Romania. We still don't know exactly if they have 100,000 hectares or 1 million hectares of primary old-growth forest, and it's a very complex and difficult issue. Again, I don't want to go into the detail why it's happening. But what's important that we have nice, not only stands, but sometimes even landscapes, small landscapes with remaining primary forest. Here it's an example of the Romanian Făgăraș Mountains, where we find out really beautiful, untouched old growth and primary forest, which doesn't have almost any protection. And here it's example of the Făgăraș Mountains, and that it's not only like isolated fragmented stands, but we really have like a small landscape with 10,000 hectares of remaining primary forest. But what's also really sad that EU, despite giving quite a lot of advices to Brazil and Bolsonaro how they should protect the Amazonian forest, the EU is still not having like a clear plan on protection of their primary and old-growth forests, and many of them are being destroyed and cut, despite again the fact that we have only a few of them left. And just to illustrate the recent paper from Sweden, because the Sweden is now in the head of the EU, and for the next 6 months will rule the EU. And there is quite a lot of studies that even the Sweden is converting the old and old-growth forest to plantations. So there is a recent study who would like to look at it. So I don't want to go into the details in this topic, but this is quite important background stuff for our research. So this is why we started about 15-20 years ago our project, which is called like a remote research of mountain temperate primary forest. We are focusing mainly on the East and Southeast Europe, and we are trying to understand the general dynamics, disturbance regime, but also trying to see and highlight the value of those forests in terms of carbon stock and biodiversity. So this is how our network looks like right now. So over the last 20 years, we established about 1,500 permanent plots in several countries: Slovakia, Romania, Ukraine, Croatia, Albania, Bulgaria, Bosnia, and also in our country. And we have about 80 stands of primary forest, and these are mountain forests. And we have like two forest types. It's a Pizza abies, Norway spruce dominated, and then Ficus sylvatica, European beech dominated. We were trying from the beginning to have some kind of like a representative landscape level picture. Of course, we still work with the fragmented landscape, but we were trying to have this hierarchical structure, plot, stand, landscape region whenever it was possible with random selection in the field, that we really have like a representative picture of the landscape level processes. So basically, in terms of method, we use the standard forest inventory method. So we have a permanent plots with the tree mapped, collecting the basic tree-level structure, tree-level data. But also we were trying to go into the specific data types, especially related to the biodiversity, like microhabitats or biodiversity in specific type. But this is what we are using for different studies. I will not discuss for that. We are trying to remeasure the plots every 5 years, which is kind of demanding and very difficult and complicated. But let's see if we will be able to keep that. And of course, this is quite a lot of intensive field work, but we are lucky that still a lot of young people are enthusiastic in going and work in these field sites. Many of them, they don't come again, but there is a certain proportion which come again, and they really like this hard condition and this hard field work. And of course, data organized in the database that it's hopefully simply to use for external cooperators. And I didn't talk about one important aspect. We are collecting the tree ring data. This is an important part of our work, and it was an important part of our work from the beginning. And right now we have database about, I'm not actually sure, but more than 20,000 tree cores that we sampled during the last 15 years. Again, it was incredible amount of work to collect the data, to process the data, but we think that the tree ring data are really interesting tool, an interesting archive, and that they can provide a lot of information about the way how our forests work. And I'll try to explain how. Of course, tree ring data are used heavily by the dendroclimatologists for reconstructing of the past climate, but also they can tell us quite a lot about the demographic processes which are going on in our forests. And the methods we are using, these were like established by the forest ecologists in North America. This is an example of one book and which we are using for our work, and where the basic methods are actually established and described if someone would be interested. But if I try to very shortly and simply explain how the tree ring can tell you something about the tree demography and about the processes going on in the forest, here on this slide you can see example of the two tree cores, and you can see the tree rings. This is example of the Pizza ABS core, and basically you can see the tree growth pattern. And this tree was growing from the young age in open canopy environment, and that's why you can see quite big and wide tree rings. And this is what we call open canopy recruitment. I will go back to it later on. And this is what, and here you can see the tree growing relatively slowly in the first phase of its life, and here being so-called suppressed. And this suppression is caused by the fact that the tree was overtopping by another tree. And here you can see suddenly increase in the tree growth. And this is like caused by the release and by the loss of the competition of the neighboring or overtopping tree. And basically we can look at the picture of photo from like a disturbed site. You can see that this is a beach fir forest hit by the current wind disturbance. And of course, if we would have a permanent plot there and long-term observation data, we would see it in our mortality data. But since we don't have so many plots, and in many cases the records are too short, and we didn't record it, the dead trees, when you come back there, when you come back in this plot in 100 years, it will be very difficult to actually understand what was going on. And the tree ring data will actually help you to reconstruct what was happening there. So imagine how, for example, the tree ring pattern of this tree will look like, or this one, which survived the disturbance, and imagine how the tree growth pattern of the trees which get established after the disturbance will look like. And actually, this is exactly what we can see and we can reconstruct. So open canopy recruitment, that means the tree growth of the trees growing after the disturbance, established after the disturbance, and then release, which is actually which will be identified in those trees. And if you have enough data from given plot, you can really reconstruct the past disturbance, be called like a past canopy removal. And here it's an example of the plot level signal where we which experience high canopy removal with a lot of open canopy recruitment. This would be example of such a plot, how this plot looks like now. And you can see and you can imagine how which type of disturbance actually caused this kind of plot level stand structure and this kind of signal. And another example of a plot where you have a continuous canopy recruitment and mixture of open canopy recruitment and suppression, and quite complex structure of the plot where this kind of signal would get. So this is a simple explanation of this tree ring based disturbance history construction. Of course, it has certain limitations. It's quite a complex method with a lot of assumption, but it can give us like a good example, or pardon, good picture of what was happening on your plot for last 200, 300 years till when you have the tree ring record data. Of course, it's really time consuming and you need to core a lot of trees, but then you can get a quite interesting information. So let's talk about the first part of our research question. This is the disturbance history of those primary forests. And of course, we all know about disturbances, how important they are. And we all know about the natural disturbance regimes and about how they are changing with the climate change. But basically, when we started this work about 20 years ago in Central Europe, and this is an example of one of our study sites. This is a barbecue outbreak in Bohemian forest and Bavarian forest, border national park between Czech and Germany, where actually it was one of the first areas where these natural disturbances started to occur, and they were not really suppressed by the humans. And again, surprisingly, despite the 200 years of forest management in Central Europe, 20 years ago, there was a very limited knowledge about the natural disturbances. And I remember when I was studying at the university at the Faculty of Forestry, that our forest ecology teachers didn't really talk about disturbances, and we did get really limited knowledge of natural disturbances, you know. And I remember surprise of one of my colleagues from US when he was visiting us 15 years ago, forest ecologist, fully known about natural disturbances, and he was surprised how limited knowledge about natural disturbances we have here in the Central Europe, and especially for our forests that we manage. And that's why actually we started to do all this work. And as I said, the natural disturbances are important. They're very important, but much more important is the way how we treat them and what we think about them. And this example of forest management, actually sanitary and salvage logging of natural disturbances in Low Tatra Mountains National Park. And actually you can still see that the way how we treat natural disturbances is very specific, and that actually in many cases the forest management implies on the landscape much stronger picture than the natural disturbances. And actually this is the reason why it's important, so important to understand the natural disturbances. But when I go to results of our research in this spruce mountain forest in Central Europe, basically, not surprisingly, what we find out that in this remaining primary forest, we see a quite complex pattern of natural disturbances. What you can see on this figure is it's a forest landscape of the Western Carpathians. This is the border between Slovakia and Poland, and this is about 16 stands, primary stands which we identified and where we did our tree work. And these figures shows you the proportion of different severity classes. So we have a low, moderate, high, very high disturbances, and these are the important periods which we identified for those sites in Slovakia. So basically, the sites which were not affected by the humans based on the historical data we collected, and sites which were affected by the natural disturbances. And you can see that the natural disturbances, even with very high severity, were always presented at the landscape. One thing I didn't mention, and which is important, the tree reconstruction gives you idea about the past canopy removal, but doesn't, of course, give you an idea about the type of the disturbance. So you cannot really distinguish it if it was a windstorm or barbecue outbreak or combination of both. And of course, you cannot really distinguish between the, for example, human management and natural disturbances. So this is why you have to be sure that the sites you're sampling are not like sites with a heavy effect of the past human management. So another figure which is trying to quantify the natural disturbances in this high elevation mountain spruce forest. And basically, again, what I said, mixed complex pattern of disturbances. So we recorded these disturbances of all severity with quite significant canopy removal, with quite large sizes, up to 50, 60 hectares. And a significant part of the spruce stands is affected by disturbances during its lifespan. Again, nothing surprising for people all over the globe. But 15 years ago, when we tried to present this in Central Europe, it was still quite important because, as I said, many foresters considered disturbances as something unnatural and something which is not typical for our forest. So low severity, but also higher severity and moderate severity disturbances are typical for our mountain forest. They were there. But of course, now it's a question with the change of the disturbance regime, how and what will happen in the future. Another question which we ask, if we actually can see some kind of like regional synchronization in the disturbances. And this is a paper which was published in Global Change Biology 5 years ago, but I think it's still quite interesting and relevant. And the legacy of this study and legacy of the disturbances we can still see in the field. So basically on this figure, you can see like three hypothetical basically examples of the regional synchronization. So this left panel shows no regional synchronization. This middle panel shows like a strong regional synchronization caused by, for example, big mega drought. And this right panel shows somehow something between. And when we go to our results, so basically here in this middle panel, you can see our 5 landscapes. So Czechia, Slovakia, Ukraine, northern and southern Romania. And this blue curve is like the mean canopy removal area for given region. And this upper panel shows the regional synchronization. So basically, we find out in the region synchronization. For example, you can see the Slovakia has a very important period with quite kind of like a peak in canopy removal after 1850, while Ukraine, Romania had this peak much later. While, for example, in Czech Republic, we find this peak after in the beginning of the 19th century. So basically, the conclusion from that there was kind of interesting regional synchronization, but of course they were like differences between different regions. But what we actually think that this kind of past disturbance legacy has a quite important effect on what's going on in the landscape right now, and I will discuss it. I will talk about it later on. So basically, this is the summary of this study, and what I see as important is that the recent disturbances that we see right now in those high elevation mountain spruce forests needs to be seen in the light of legacy effect, but also in the light of the climate change. So, for example of the recent canopy disturbances in one of the Slovakian sites where we are working. This is a Tichá and Koprová Valley, where we have the remnants of the primary forest, and you can see the recent bar beetle disturbances. But again, think about the legacy from the past and how the past disturbances could affect the recent picture. So when I try to summarize a little bit what we learn about the high elevation spruce forest, natural spruce forest, and about the disturbance regime. So we we think that the moderate and high severity disturbances were always important there, but it was a variable and complex pattern in space and time. And we have to acknowledge the non-equilibrium view of the disturbances. And as I said, the recent disturbances has to be seen in light of the Bose legacy effect of climate, in light of Bose legacy effect and climate change. So that was the high elevation mountain spruce forest. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about the lower elevation mixed forest, where the beech, Fagus sylvatica, but also Abies alba, but also Picea abies are important tree species. And this is not published yet. It's kind of a long process going on. We are delayed many things like many other people, but hopefully we will be able to publish soon. But again, do not complicate it so much. Again, similar figure. So you can see across the Carpathians, different sites and proportion of different severities. So what's important and what I want to highlight, that even in those mixed fir beech forests, which are very often considered as very stable and not really being disturbed, we found quite interesting and important disturbances. In somehow they have very similar pattern, despite disturbance being less severe and small size, but otherwise it's quite interesting to see that there are not so significant changes. Of course, but these beech forests, they miss these very large, high severe disturbances compared to the spruce forest. But otherwise, they have also quite interesting pattern of mixed severity disturbances with the windstorms being the very important. What we tried to do for this forest type, we were also trying to see if we can find some kind of change over time. So this is not yet published, and we are discussing if actually we could do it this way or other way, and we are trying to see if over time we can see some kind of change in, for example, severity or patch area of the disturbances. This is published, and in this study, one of our colleagues tried to see if and how the large-scale cyclones introduce windstorms or convective instabilities or thunderstorms, how they were affecting the beech forest, and if the change, especially in the cyclone-induced windstorms over the 20th century, is actually changing the disturbance regime. And in this study, we didn't really find any specific changes. So it actually shows that these mountain mixed forests are quite resilient to ongoing climate change, at least from the windstorm perspective so far. So they are large and moderate disturbances, but they were there always. Of course, there are some other types of disturbances. I want to refer to this ice storm, which hit significant part of Slovenia and Croatia a few years ago. And of course, the droughts, which are also starting to emerge in these forest types. And of course, this is going to be interesting, and it will be important to see how these type of disturbances, how they are affecting our forest, and also if we can actually find some kind of longer historical data about their occurrence and how these recent disturbances, how they actually relate to some kind of historical data about those two types of disturbances. So this is some kind of like a summary picture or figure for the disturbance regime of these two forest types. And you can see that for the spruce forest, the larger scale and higher severity disturbances are more typical. But what I would like to mention is this heterogeneity and complexity in space and time, and also this non-equilibrium view of the disturbance regime. Also, we think that these results are quite important implication, at least for the nature conservation areas. And we try to communicate those messages, which is not sometimes so easy, and still in many national parks, especially in East and Southeast Europe, the natural disturbances are considered something wrong, something which is not natural. And I think that's why it's still important to communicate and to do a research on those events, because we have to bring that into the practice, and we will hope that in the future the forest managers will be ready to accept that the natural disturbances are actually part of the natural forest dynamics. Now I'd like to talk a little bit more about tree longevity, because again, despite like a very long use of the European forest, surprisingly, we find very few like representative data about the tree longevity of our common species. Of course, you have the anecdotal data about one spruce being 1,000 years old, but we have very few data about the population-based signal. And this is what we try to do in this study, which was published last year, and where we use our database. And when you look at this figure, we have four species. We have Abies alba, Acer pseudoplatanus, Fagus sylvatica, and Picea abies. Here you can see the numbers of the samples. So we have about, in this study, about 7,500 beech trees and about 11,000 spruce trees. For fir and Acer, we have much less data. And also what I want to add, that this is the random sampling, so this comes from our research plot where we don't subjectively choose the trees, but we randomly samples the trees across the plot, stands, and landscape. So this is a good overall, like a picture, population-based picture. And what you see here, it's a age distribution for 10% of the oldest trees. So for about 1,100 oldest beech spruce trees, about 700 oldest beech trees. And what we find out that, of course, they are all trees. Surprisingly, the beech was the oldest tree, was the oldest that we find out. And again, as I said, it's a random sampling, so we didn't really go for the oldest trees. Okay, this is more like a population-based signal. So we have about 500, 700 years old beech trees. But what's interesting, that these very old beech trees are more like an exception. They are very rare, and that majority of those trees, they are old from like a forest management perspective, but they are not so old as one would expect that the tree will get old in the primary forest. And we can, of course, discuss why and what's the reason behind that. Also, we test for the effect of environment. We didn't find any effect of the temperature, precipitation across these Carpathian and Balkan sites. But what we did find was the effect of the disturbances. So basically, plots which were having more severe disturbances, they had fewer older trees. And also, what's quite important and interesting is that the disturbances regulate the growth in terms of regulating the periods of the suppression. And actually, if you remember, we discussed it, that these very slow growth, which we call suppression, is actually partly regulated by the disturbances and by the stand structure. Because in the stands where you have less frequent and less severe disturbances, you will find more trees with this really suppressed growth, And basically, what we find out that this growth, these periods of suppression, are actually really important for trees getting very, very old. I will talk about it a little bit later. This figure is from the unpublished study, and I just want that you look at this one left figure. What you can see again is the similar picture. So fir, acer, beech, spruce in the mixed forest, spruce in the mountain forest, and here you can see the life strategies, the way how they trees access the canopy. That means if they went to the canopy through open canopy recruitment, remember what I showed you, or if they experience several periods of the suppression before actually they reach the canopy. And actually you can see that for the beech, there's a quite lot of proportion of the trees with 1 or 2 periods of suppression, And compared to the high elevation mountain spruce forest, where you have much more high proportion of the trees with the open canopy recruitment. So this is, of course, also related to the shade tolerance of given tree species. But I just want to highlight the importance of the disturbances in this kind of process. And this was also confirmed in this recently published study, which actually focused only on the spruce and which started much earlier than the previous pictures, but the project was delayed. But finally, our colleague managed to publish it, but it took a little bit more than we thought. And what you can see on this figure, and what's more or less the main message we would like to communicate, that here on the, you can see the cambial age of the trees, 0 by 100. Here you can see the basal area increment, and this gray to black line show different age classes of the high elevation mountain spruce forest. And you can see that for the very old trees, what's very typical is this very slow growth in the beginning, but it's not slow growth per se, but it's a very often like a suppressed growth caused by the specific disturbance regime. And we actually have like these two blue, these two different colors, the blue and red line, and they are some kind of like a model values for slow growth and young age and fast growth, slow growth and old tree, and fast growth and young tree, based on the growth data we have available. This figure is actually showing the same data, but ordered by the calendar year this time. And again, you can see the different age classes of the trees. So trees 500, 550, 200, and further up to trees 400 and 450. And it shows the similar pattern. Of course, there are some, let's say, limitations. One of the important fact to consider is that nowadays the trees that are growing different way than they grew in the past because of the increasing the temperature, and we can actually see it in the growth of the young trees. So the general interpretation of this study is valid on the spruce and Picea abies, and we still have to test it if this pattern is valid also for the Fagus sylvatica, where I think we could have a slightly different result. So again, when I try to summarize that disturbances, they have an important effect on the tree age, and the slow juvenile growth and suppressed growth are prolonging the tree lifespan. And disturbance severity and shorter time since the last disturbance are actually decreasing it. And the highest age means basically actually slow juvenile growth followed by the subsequent growth release. And these two conclusions, which are in gray, they are valid only for the spruce mountain forest, because, as I said, we didn't publish yet, and we didn't finalize the analysis with the Fagus sylvatica. So, but what's still quite interesting is that these large old spruce trees, they still continue to grow, and they have quite interesting high plasticity for the increasing the biomass, which has a quite interesting consequences for the carbon sink. And now I am going to the tree mortality, and basically it's I will try to shorten it because I'm a little bit took a little bit more time than I thought. So we didn't really expect in the beginning when we started with this project, but I'm getting old, so now we have already like for some sites 10 years old mortality data, which are very short from the forest dynamics point of view. But what's interesting is this large region for which you have the mortality data. So you can see these are the spruce stands available and the number of the plots. So we can actually see not the long-term trends, but we can actually see the regional trends, which are quite interesting. So these are results from one published study about the spruce forest and about the recent mortality patterns, because this is a quite hot issue in the region. And on the simple figure, you can see the annual mortality rates and the differences between the stands in different countries, with Slovakia having the highest mortality rates. And in Slovakia, you can see the quite high variability between the stands. We have stands with relatively low mortality, but stands with quite high mortality. And while in Ukraine and Romania, there are some plots with relatively high mortality, but many plots actually doesn't show anything quite interesting. So not surprisingly, bark beetle was the main mortality agent in most of the plots, even with the plots with the relatively low severity. And now remember what I said about the Slovakia and about this legacy of the past disturbances. And you can see that the Slovakia experienced quite intensive period of disturbances around 1860, 1870. And basically, we think that this has a quite interesting and important legacy on what's going on there. But of course, since we live in the fragmented landscape, and I told you about the intensive human management going on still in many of the sites, of course, these man-made disturbances and the reaction of the man-made disturbances on the natural disturbances, they can have quite important effect on that. But still, this is unpublished, and we try to test the effect of the past disturbances history on the recent mortality rates. Past disturbance history reconstructed by the tree ring, and the recent mortality rates based on the field observation. And actually, we find some interesting relationship where the recent canopy mortality was found to be the highest on the least disturbed plot. So here you can see the different variables for the past canopy removal that we can calculate from our tree ring data, and you can see the recent mortality rates, which I think is quite interesting. And this figure actually shows the number of the variability explained in the current tree mortality based from the field, from the repeated measurements, and how this can be explained by the past canopy disturbance. So basically, there is a quite interesting connection. And as I said, the recent mortality rates has to be viewed with respect to the legacy of the past disturbances, and not only the recent climate change. So here, I'd like to do a small break, and you all probably, at least the ones who participated in the talk of the Andreas Bolte, he talked about the mortality rates of the German forest, and I'd like to just do very 1-2 minute break. And Czech Republic was also hit heavily by the current bark beetle outbreaks, affecting our commodity managed forest. And I want to mention, especially for people who are not from the Central Europe, that basically we use the spruce as an important commodity tree species in our managed forests or commodity plantations that we spread all over at least in Czech Republic, in about 70% of our forest land. And here you can see the increase of the salvage logging in European countries, but also in the Czech Republic. And these are published figures, and they don't really go up to the peak, which was in 2020 and 2021. And this is a result from one published study. And why I talk about that, I just want to mention that very often when people talk about this collapse of the forest in Central Europe and in Czech Republic, very often they try to forget to say that this is a collapse of the very often commodity plantations planted in areas where naturally we would have the mixed broadleaf forest. And we foresters for the last 100 years, we really homogenized the landscape and really created like a perfect shot for the natural disturbances. And in many cases, we should not really talk that the forests are collapsing, but that our plantations are collapsing, basically, you know. And I just want to make this point because even this paper didn't really mention that these these collapsing spruce forests are not like a natural forest, but these are like a planted forest. So I was surprised to learn that the colleagues really a little bit forget about this fact. So basically, on the left side, you can see how most of our forest looks like. On the right side, how they would look like if we would not change the species composition and structure so much. But going back to our primary forest, and I'm almost at the end of the presentation. So I talk about the spruce mortality rates, the spruce primary forest mortality rates, and about the differences. For the beech forest, we didn't really find anything interesting. Basically, there is mortality going on, but there is nothing specific so far. Of course, we have very short observation period, but we have quite a lot of data in Carpathian and in the Balkan region. Wind being the most important disturbance, but also there are other factors. And as I said, there are some interesting disturbances which are not so well studied. For example, this ice storm, and we want to pay more attention to it. And as one of the few last slide, actually, I'd like to talk about something which is exciting and which we would like to do addition to this classical mortality observation. We are coring all the dead trees and slowly getting information about the growth pattern of the dead trees. And I think that this might allow in the future quite interesting evaluation of the reason why the trees are growing, why the trees are dying, and especially about when we record the mortality. Basically it's a subjective recording. Basically, you try to when the tree is uprooted, it's clear. But when you find a dead tree standing, it's kind of difficult sometimes to say if it's a drought or bark beetle or fungi. But this tree ring growth pattern can tell you a lot about the reason why trees died. For example, if you have a living healthy tree and then it will be uprooted, basically you see no pattern. But if there is some kind of like a slow death going on, like here, you can really record it and you can quantify it with the tree ring growth. And that's why I would like to ask if someone is interested in this kind of analysis, and if they are collecting the mortality data, and if they would be willing to collect the cores, we might be interested to measure it, and maybe we could have an interesting analysis for the future. So basically, there are some conclusions, but I think I don't have to really go into it. On the tree longevity, I hope I said everything. I'd like to stay one last minute on the conclusion slide for our project. So I hope we will be able to run it. It's a quite heavy work with a lot of international cooperation. We are also very open to cooperation, sharing our data with many different teams. I think this is really important. Also doing our own research work. Of course, funding is crucial for us because this field campaigns are quite expensive. And I'd like to highlight that dendroecology we see as a quite interesting tool for the future research in the tree demography and stand demography. And of course, what we try to do is to use our research for communication with the policymakers and with the forest managers, and trying to make an impact in the real world with our research. So thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful. Miro, thank you so much for this input. As always, wonderful wealth of data and material. And I have I've learned plenty of things, and it's always great to see the work that you're doing. Thank you so much. Thanks also to the audience for being here. I'm sure there's a lot of interesting things also for you there in there too. If you have questions, there's two ways of asking them to Miro. So either you can type them in the chat, and one of us here from the Tree Mortality Network organizers, we will read them out to Miro, and Miro will answer them. Or you could also just raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask your question the old-fashioned direct one-on-one way. So the way we used to do it when we met actually in meeting rooms. So to both options, just either make yourself known through raising the hand and unmute yourself and ask a question, or typing it in the chat. Miro, I want to start with a question that puzzled me a little bit on the longevity thing. I think this is really exciting, a really exciting piece of the story. I was a little bit surprised that you didn't find any effect of the environment on the longevity, because, in many other parts of the world, there's like the harsher the environment, usually the older the trees. Do you have any explanation for this? Is it the disturbance regime or the species or the forest type? So why is this different?
It's good question, Rupert. We were also surprised. We thought that we might find some interesting pattern, and one of the reasons could be that basically, despite we are having like a large gradients, the sites are more or less similar. So it's surprising, but even in the Balkan region, you would see, okay, it's a Balkan region, you have a less precipitation, hotter climate, but these fir beech forests, they grow actually there in the more moist and cool sites, and the Balkan mountains, they are very, very wet actually. It's surprising, they are close to the Mediterranean Sea, so they are hit by the precipitation. So one of the reasons is actually that there is basically not so much gradient between many of our sites, and it's actually birch beech forest zone with specific type of climate and not so much gradient, and the same for the spruce. So this could be one potential explanation, that we didn't sample large enough gradient, since we are like a sampling one forest type in some kind of like a close canopy forest.
Yep, interesting. Thanks for the explanation. Really, really interesting patterns to see emerging there. There's been a question by Naomi Zürcher in the chat, and she's asking about tree coring and the effects that it could have, like damaging effects on old trees, and if there are potentially other non-invasive procedures. Maybe you could comment a little bit on
yeah. It's of course like a big question, even here in Central Europe, and we always have to respect the local settings, and we always like to core the trees only with permissions. Very often we have like a limitation for the coring, and despite it looks like that we cored all the trees there, but it's a still very small percentage. And basically what I can report from the published studies, didn't really find any effect of the coring on the tree mortality. But of course, from the practical point of view, if you core a very small tree, you basically kill it. That's kind of true. But on the other hand, since there are so many old trees, you don't really affect the tree demography, especially if you do it with like a specific design. For all the trees, what's typical for this primary forest, that many of the older trees, they are actually already rotten when we core them, and you can see that there's already rot inside. And what we try to do, that we use the wax for we use the wax for the healing the trees. And as I said, so far there are not like studies which would like show that the tree coring is heavily affecting the tree demography or the tree longevity.
Thanks for that. There is a question by Rocco Pace on, as far as I understand it, the question is on how we do biodiversity conservation in these primary forests, considering that climate change impacts them in terms of drought and changing disturbance regimes. I mean, is there a conservation lesson in there, or what's your recommendation? And then sort of the add-on question is, how can we learn from some of your results for managing forests? I mean, you've made the point that we have strongly homogenized, but what can we take from that?
It's a very good question. So maybe I can start with this question. So basically, I mentioned in the beginning that we are trying to promote the idea of this ecological forestry, which is something. It's definitely not the mainstream forest management type, but in specific regions of the world, especially in North America, it's very much promoted. And this ecological forestry is actually taking the nature as a template and the natural disturbance regime as a baseline. And then you actually mention it, and this complex pattern in the space and time of the natural disturbances and the complex structure which is arising from these natural disturbances is actually giving a good template for our current forest management. So I think we can learn a lot from those natural forests in a way how we manage our landscape. And trying to explain, answering the first question, I'm not sure if I really get the question, but even with the changing disturbance regimes, these natural forests, they are still very valuable in terms of biodiversity. And I think, Rupert, you have a study published that actually natural disturbances in most of the time doesn't have a harmful effect on the biodiversity, but in most of the cases they actually have a positive effect on the biodiversity. So I think that there is a way we can use this information, and I didn't really talk about, but we try to highlight the role of the biodiversity value in those natural forests, and we have some studies published in this direction, but there was no time for that today.
I would certainly agree, if I may add, that there is value in these forests, despite the fact that they are disturbed, and despite the fact that they are also changing. I think they are quite valuable. Nadine, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I raised my hand. I wanted to ask the question too. Thank you, Miro, for the inspiring talk. Do you think that all the wealth of data that you collected and now these massive dendrometer network that you set up, can you use that also to forecast what is going to happen with the forest? Are you planning to do that?
No. We are like a field-based ecologist, and we work with the current situation and with the past. But as I said, we are sharing the data with different groups, and actually there are several groups already which are using or which plan to use our data for the modeling purposes. And as I said, if anyone would be interested, we would be more than happy to provide what we have. And we have like a good database. We can share the access to the database, and as I said, we would be more than happy to share the data with any modeling group. But we are not the modelers.
Yeah, thank you.
So Miro, there's another question by Rüdiger Grote, and it's about the legacy effect, which was an important part of your talk, and I think it's also great to talk about this a little bit more. And Rüdiger writes that that some legacy effect is going on because the site had less disturbance in the past, or is it because the largest mortality, I mean there was large mortality in the past. So is it fewer mortality in the past that creates a lot of mortality now, or is it having large patches of mortality in the past that creates more mortality in the future?
Yeah.
So is it the structure basically that's homogenized, or is it the individuals?
I think you could see actually both, like, and depends on the scale. So the past disturbances are important, and they have a legacy. So for example, since in Slovakia we saw a peak in the landscape level disturbances around 1850. Since then, these forests get mature again, and they get ripe for another pulse of the disturbances. If there would be more disturbances in the 20th century, there would be less mature forests right now. That's one point. But also at the tree and plot level, the plots with the more structure, they have a less disturbances right now. But they were also being constantly disturbed throughout the time. And since there's complex pattern of these past disturbances, so both those processes are going on. So I think this is what I wanted to say, highlighting this legacy effect.
Very, very interesting to see. I mean, I think also if they're like for the legacy effect, if we are moving away from a more, or if you're talking more about mixed severity or a variable severity disturbance regime, then there will be a different type of legacy than if you have a very high severity history in the past.
Exactly, I agree. And maybe what I want to add, and this is like a one study that I didn't really mention, but just accept it. We actually see that the growth rates of the young trees has changed over the last 200 years, and the way how the forests recover now will be maybe faster than in the past, and by this faster recovery, that might create more homogeneous stands possibly, or especially in these high elevation forests which were temperature limited, and this could have a quite important effect on the future structure, but this is just speculation, and since we don't have so much data on that, we want to go into the little bit more detail in the future.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing. There's another question by Emily Isasa on whether you've thought about combining drought-related traits, so tree traits, with dendrochronological or dendroecological results.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and basically, there is a U.S. genetist who she was based in Vienna, and now she's, I think, moving to Sweden, and she was actually going into much more detail into how into the within population based tree growth signal, and how the different tree growth, how the variability in the genetics in the trees is responsible for what we are observing. So we are not really expert in that. It's a really interesting question, but as I said, we are not really expert in this field. So we rather cooperate with someone who is very much experienced. So let's see what this study will result, and what kind of result this study will get. But it's quite interesting. I definitely agree that it's worth it to look at it.
Great. I think our time is almost up. I have one more, Miro, that I'm interested, because it's more of a social question almost. You mentioned that students are interested, and then sometimes they don't come back. I mean, you're doing research in these systems for quite a while now. Do you see a change? I mean, are people getting more interested in these forests? Is the interest always staying the same? Is there less interest? I kind of feel that the attitudes towards forests have changed quite a bit in the general public, but also in the way I perceive students. But I'd be interested to hear your perspectives. Well, your parts of the world and the students.
What's
and the
good
that you're interacting.
Yeah, it's a good question, Rupert, because we are really dependent on the young people, and on the hiring really huge bunch of people who will go with us to the field. There are still young people who wants to go to the field. Of course, sometimes they have a little bit naive ideas about how it works, and that's why I said that many of them, they don't come back again, because this is a very tough field work and difficult field work. But what's good, that we still have people who go with us again and again, and they don't earn a lot of money. We cannot really pay it as it would be deserved. But I think generally there is still quite a big interest in young people and the students in this kind of forests, which I think is really great, because as I said, it's not really easy field work, and everyone who try, he knows how it is.
Wonderful, but it's good to hear that people are interested and people are going there. It's wonderful work that you do. I think this is a very nice conclusion of this seminar. Thanks again, Miro, for being here. Thanks for sharing your work with us. It's been really wonderful, and I certainly learned a lot. Thanks everybody for attending. We had a great turnout again today, and it's wonderful to see this continued interest of the community in this seminar series. I can only say thanks to everybody, and stay tuned for the next installment of our seminar series.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.